Hello everyone and happy Tuesday. I'm here to talk a little bit about animal agriculture, and I know this kind of ties into my video last week about why I decided to become a vegan, but there's a lot of pretty astounding facts out there if you know where to look. I'm also going to recommend 3 documentaries if you haven't seen them yet. I know I've talked about them before. The one that's really big on animal agriculture is called Earthlings. It's pretty horrifying if you haven't seen it. But the 2 that talk about the link between animal agriculture and health are What the Health, both on Netflix, and Forks Over Knives, which are both really interesting. I got my family to watch, or my mom at least, to watch both of them. And she's starting to think about switching up her foods a little bit more. I'm getting my stepdad to watch it too. I just have to convince my brother to watch one of them and see. But anyway, animal agriculture, it is a culture. It is the farmers and the Meat and Drug Administration companies and the Dairy Association and the Egg Association and all of the drug companies that get 70% of their profit from selling antibiotics to and other hormones to the animals that are produced for food. So they get a lot of money from this, and anything that happens to the animal agriculture industry is a hit for the drug companies. A lot of our food, we know, is not the quality that it used to be. The quality of our soil is not what it used to be because of all the spraying and the chemicals that go into it. So ultimately, in the past, people could eat fruits and vegetables and get a lot of nutrients from it, but now we don't get as much as we used to, even if you buy organic, because the soil is so depleted in nutrients that unless you grow it yourself, it's really hard to get the necessary nutrients. I found this fact, I forget where I found it, that the global output of animal protein will have to double in the next 40 years to meet the demand. The global demand for meat products is very, very high. Red meat alone makes $20.9 billion a year, and this was in 2017, so it's probably quite higher than that. But 70% of this is processed meats. So things like hot dogs, hamburgers, sausages, deli meats, all of that processed meat, that's where they get a lot of their money from. But nobody really talks about the modifications that we made. We make them to plants, agri-farmed plants, to increase their output. So the fruit gets bigger. The plants grow more leaves and flowers so that they grow more fruit. And the same thing happens with the animals. They're given a lot of growth hormones. Chickens have now been modified years and years and years ago. They used to only make 50 to 60 eggs in a year. Now, each chicken makes about 300 eggs a year, which is absolutely insane if you think about it. Because I don't know how their bodies can even handle all of that, but I know that they modify the chickens to be bigger and have more meat. I know that and this is in one of the documentaries, that once they're killed, they inject the meat with salt water to make it bigger, and it soaks into the meat and makes it a little bigger, which is why chicken is one of the biggest sources of sodium in the North American diet. So all of the big associations that say chicken is heart healthy and all of these things, it's actually a really big contributor to heart conditions, clogged arteries, and all of that. Bacterial contamination in the actual factory farms is a really big problem, because as the demand grows, there's not that much land available because they keep expanding and they're poisoning the land, and then they have to move a little bit. But as the demand gets bigger, the animals have less and less space, which means if one of them gets sick with something or dies, then the other ones in that area get contaminated with bacteria, which is really not good because we end up eating it. They also showed a little video clip on what we spray into the soil, and then the bigger the animal that we're getting it from, the more contaminants we're going to actually ingest. So for example, we get more from a cow than we do from a pig because they're physically bigger, which means they eat more, which means they're getting more chemicals from the soil, and we end up eating that. Pesticides and fungicides, it's the same issue. They spray it on just about everything, and it's really not safe for us. They do, I know they spray it on fruits and vegetables too, but realistically, a lot of the farms went out of business when mass production came because those who produced crops, the weather, if it was a bad year, they didn't make enough money to stay afloat because animals can outlive crops quite easily because they're very tough, and a lot of them are kept indoors. So the farmers that farm animals don't have to worry about losing their entire crop to the weather, which is something else. But going back into the numbers for a minute. In 2017, these are the numbers of animals processed for food in, I believe it's just the United States, but it could be North America. 11.52 million cows, 14.33 million pigs, 813,900 sheep and lambs, 230,034 goats, 119,314 bison, 37,343 deer and elk. The chicken industry made $2.5 billion. There's $384 million in turkey and $1.08 million in eggs. Canada is actually a very big exporter of meat because in the prairies where they have a lot of ranches, the ranchers grow the cattle and then they ship the meat to the States. So our economy actually gets a lot of money from meat, which, considering how poor our economy is right now, that's surprising to believe, but people think there's a lot of money in meat, which there is. If you make you don't really even need a high quality product, as long as it's not contaminated, people will buy it. So it is a big moneymaker, but ultimately the trend, they say that actually the stats for the UK are more impressive because vegetarianism and veganism are really big over there. But over here, considering our population is much, much bigger than the UK, there are thousands and thousands of new vegetarians and vegans every single day. And that makes me really happy because not just for the animal ethics portion of it, which is what this video is about, but the environmental concerns and just the general health of the public, because thousands and thousands of people die every year from things like cardiovascular disease, obesity, all of that are caused by eating these things, and ultimately our planet couldn't support. If everybody ate perfectly healthy, our planet would be overrun with people immediately because nobody would be dying from these chronic diseases. So, something else to think about. Animal agriculture, this one was kind of surprising to me, takes up 40% of the world's landmass, which is pretty big considering a very big portion of it is water, and what's left, they still have 40%. And a large portion of the animal production is in Canada, America, the United States. A little bit in South America, in China, but there's not a lot of it in Europe because they have a lot more close together cities there. They don't have a lot of extra space for it. Russia a little bit, but not so much. I find it's mostly in those big three. There's a lot of facts about freshwater use and things like that. A lot of agri-farmers use freshwater to feed and water their animals. They use 70% of the world's fresh water to feed, and when I mean feed, I mean grow the food and the crops, the grains that the animals eat, and give them water. 70% of the world's fresh water is going to growing animals for food, which is pretty astounding because if we stopped doing that, there would be no thirsty people in the world, and we could use the crops that they were growing for the animals, cut that in half, and you could still feed everyone on the planet, which is pretty amazing. It's also a quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, especially pigs. I know they talk about pigs produce a lot of methane, and so do cows, but a quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, which is bigger than the entire transportation industry. So things like planes, trains, cars, buses, boats, all of that makes less greenhouse gas emissions than animal farming, which is pretty amazing. But ultimately, it comes down to the consumer. They are producing animals for food because we buy it. And if we stop buying it, they would stop producing it because they don't make enough money. So there would be a mass panic, basically, if we stop buying meat, because especially the really shifty ones where there's always contamination and things like that, they would have to shut down because they don't have the money to keep going, and the standard of care for animals that are processed food would go up, because to stay in business, you have to have a really high quality product. So it's something else to think about, because ultimately we aren't defined by our choices, but there's a lot of power in what we choose to spend our time and money on. So something is a little going into the environmentally friendly side. People produce plastic straws because we use them. If we stop using them, they would stop making them. Very simple. The cheap throwaway, I believe it's called the fast fashion industry, the super cheap clothes that are, $3 for a shirt or something, that kids usually in China end up making in the sweatshops, they would stop, not forcing them to work, but we wouldn't have so much waste from people buying clothes, wearing it 2 times, and then throwing it out. And ultimately, you could easily donate these clothes so that people who need clothes can have clothes, but investing in a quality item ultimately produces less waste. So again, it's what you spend your money on. If everybody, and I keep seeing posts about how the price of meat is going up next year, because with the trend in veganism and vegetarianism, people don't want meat as much, which means that there's less demand for it, which means they have to charge more to make money from it. And there's actually a joking article, I can't tell whether this was serious or not, that millennials don't know how to cook meat and they don't want to learn, so they don't buy it. So that's another reason that apparently meat is going to cost more next year. But fruits and vegetables are also going to cost more because the demand is going up. So basically, anything you buy is going to cost more next year. But ultimately, if you go to the bulk store, if you basically just eat fruits, vegetables, and grains, your bill is not going to be very high. But the price of meat and dairy is already really high. So and cauliflower. Cauliflower, for some reason, is now like $7 or $8 for a head of cauliflower. Pretty crazy. But you have power in your choices. So if you choose to buy something, you're supporting whatever industry it comes from. So sometimes just think a little bit before you decide to buy something, because you want to help the planet a little bit and be sustainable and things like that. But that is for a completely different video. For a long time, I've seen videos about the animal agriculture industry before. I took food and nutrition in high school, and we had to watch Food Inc., which is the Netflix documentary. It has a cow with a barcode on the side. That's the picture for the video. It was pretty disturbing, but it didn't quite hit me yet. And now that I'm in a place to make that decision, I'm really happy that I did. I wish I had done it sooner, because I know that my digestive issues and other health problems wouldn't have lasted nearly as long, but I'm happy to be able to advocate for it and educate people now about it. I hope you enjoyed my rant. I'm trying not to make anybody feel bad about their choices, but I just want to educate you so you know when you make a choice what you're supporting and what you're not. So educated consumers is having educated consumers is very important. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you, because it is about animals and wellness and animal cruelty and things like that. Didn't get into that just because it's really graphic, but just think about what you're doing next time you go to the grocery store. Talk next week for our last video of the year. Holy cow.